Hello, welcome to the second video on demand response by the FLEXCoop project. FLEXCoop is a Horizon 2020 project financed by the European Union, which aims at building demand response tools for energy cooperatives. So today, we will further explore the concepts of implicit demand response and explicit demand response. Just a reminder on the definition. Demand response is a change of electricity load by final customers from their normal or current consumption patterns. Change in that case means to anticipate or delay consumption, and this takes place in response to market signals. So through a market, and this is remunerated. There are two forms. One is time variable electricity prices, known as implicit demand response, or incentive payments or response to acceptance of the final customer's bid. This is explicit demand response. It takes place through aggregation or loan, and this takes place in order to sell demand reduction or increase at a price in organized market. So implicit demand response first. This is sometimes called price-based. In that case, consumers choose to be exposed to time-varying electricity prices that reflect the value and cost of electricity time periods. So the most classic is blue or white tariff periods, or day and night tariffs. This is the most classical form of price-based demand response, but now new forms are enabled which respond to wholesale market prices variation, and in some case, dynamic grid fees. So these new forms would require the use of a smart meter, and it does not require the role of the aggregator, provided the fact that the tariffs are the proxy for the signal and for the consumer reaction. So this is a simplified grid with the main actors and contractual relationship. The ability to react and to provide flexibility has been illustrated with a battery here, but it doesn't have to. It can be any consumption device that can be stopped for a while, and this can be a water boiler or any heating, ventilation, and air conditioning devices. So in that case, the supplier is also generator and can use this ability by the consumer to react to the status of the grid. So this will be used as a balancing resource and will enable to decrease the costs which are related to balancing, which has been illustrated here with a BRP and the little balance. BRP is balancing a responsible party, and that's the entity which is financially responsible for the balancing of the grid in a given area, which includes the retailer portfolio. Sometimes the retailer and the BRP are integrated, and sometimes it's a third party that is contracted by the retailer. In any case, this flexibility will enable to better match the two, consumption and generation, and decrease the costs related to BRP and balancing. Laying this down on this slide, so in that case where the retailer is the generator, the uses of reducing imbalances, and the retailer uses consumers' flexibility to better match the patterns of the generation assets owned by the retailer. Looking on the right side at the role, the cooperative here is both an aggregator, but in that case it would be limited to to perform consumption management according to energy generation forecast. So this means that any automation that is that could be needed on the consumer side can be performed by the retailer. Our retailer here is a generator. We'll see another case just after, and the impact is direct on balancing responsible party. Ultimately, the cooperative should be able to take the responsibility for this and limit its imbalances. The services it enables: cheaper energy bills because balancing resources has been internalized, and the ability to offer to consumers greener energy, because in the case where the energy cooperatives owns renewables, no additional balancing resources would be ideally needed. Let's go to the second case. In this case, we still have a supplier, we still have generations, but generation is not owned by the supplier, and the supplier purchase electricity on the wholesale market. Flexibility will still be used to balance somehow this portfolio, but mostly to purchase the cheapest energy available, so to push consumption towards the cheapest hours and avoid the peak hours. When it comes to renewables, green certificates are here to certify the use of green electricity, with of course the limits that it implies. So what it means here is that this flexibility can be used to buy cheaper energy on the market. So and most specifically to better match the anticipated prices. Looking at the rows on the right again, these rows are pretty much the same, except that our retailer here is not a generator anymore. And the services it enables, it's basically cheaper energy bills or contracts, depending how this is given back to the consumers. Okay, so that was for implicit demand response, provided through a retailer and through tariffs. Let's now have a look at explicit demand response. Explicit demand response is sometimes called incentive-based because it relies on an explicit signal and on the basis of a contract between the aggregator and the consumer. So the aggregated demand side resources are traded in the wholesale and balancing or any other markets. So basically here it's not an internal resource, but something we will sell to third parties, and the consumer receives direct payments because in exchange of this traded resources, the aggregator will take its share as a service provider and will provide the rest to the consumer. And yeah, on the consumer side, this means that consumers can earn money from their consumption flexibility, either individually, but this is not the case at residential level, or by contracting with an aggregator, which can be an independent service provider or directly its retailer. Oops, let's go onward. Looking at what it means for the energy system, this little graph represents a demand response event. So the blue line represents current demand, represents actual demand, what has been metered, and the dotted line represents the baseline, what would have happened without demand response. And demand response consists in selling the difference between what would have been consumed and what has been consumed as a available energy which can be used for other purposes on the grid. So this is this slightly green area that can be sold in terms of megawatt hours or kilowatt hours for residential consumers to the grid. So this is true for balancing market. These kilowatt hours can be used for balancing the grid close to real time. This is true on electricity market in day ahead or intraday markets. To some extent, it will have a slightly different use. It will not be used as kilowatt hours, but the load reduction can be used in network management, especially in congestion management. If there's too much electricity flowing on the grid at a certain time, the reduction can be valorized by the system operators. So this will enable to reduce peak on the grid. So explicit demand response, in that case, the aggregator, which can be a separate entity, an independent party, contracts with the consumers who have flexibility resources and the flexibility users. So it can bid the aggregated load on the wholesale market. It can bid it in the balancing market or other ancillary services, or with the DSO for congestion management, as just explained. In the case the aggregator is independent, it will require a contract with the retailer and with the BRP. This is today quite difficult, but the current legislation that is being discussed nowadays in Brussels, known as the Clean Energy Package, aims at simplifying a lot this process. So in that case, demand response is sold as a resource to different flexibility users at the best price on the market. So the cooperative uses the flexibility to provide services to other system actors. Again, the list here. Looking at the roles, here we have an aggregator, which is not a generation, just contract with the consumers. It may or may not be the retailer. It will have to contract with it anyhow, and it may or may not be the balance responsible party, but will have to contract with it. What it provides is a new set of revenues. In that case, the flexibility is made available to other actors in the grid that will pay for these services. And this is what is specific to explicit demand response. And I would like to just open the door to microgrid. Demand response in a microgrid context. So two trends. The fact that energy prices depends more and more on local parameters. So that's the first arrow here. This is based on the fact that there are more and more renewable resources at retailer level. So retailer may own their own resources, and it can be solar power, wind power, district heating, all very much localized. Also at prosumer level, there's a multiplication of decentralized energy resources, and this is solar PV, home storage and electric vehicle, and other flexible load. And this all means that more and more the energy is located at the local level, which means we more and more use these local resources and less the high voltage grid. And second arrow, if all energy resources are at local level and that the energy community has the opportunity to own or to operate the local grid, then there is the opportunity to develop microgrid. This is rather theoretical, but what it means is very interesting, because in an environment where prosumers own their own generation assets, could have put also rooftops PV here, and are very flexible, and that the rest of generation is also localized locally, then a given entity can be more or less autonomous. It means that the role of a cooperative here would be to be a microgrid manager, and would have to provide the services of a TSO in terms of ancillary services, balancing, frequency, all these ancillary services which are essential to the stability of the grid, and manage the local grid, role being played not only by the DSO. And in this ideal world, any needs could be procured to the main grid, so a connection would still be needed, and any surplus, any additional resources, balancing resources, for example, or ancillary services that could be provided, could be also provided by the microgrid here to the main grid, or to the opposite, procured from it. Well, I hope this clarified a little bit what demand response means. A last slide on this microgrid context. It is the ultimate stage of generation consumption management, ideally meaning that everything's balanced locally and real time. And looking at the roles, here it's a whole set of integrated roles. So basically we're talking about a microgrid, so the cooperative here will play all the role, the one of aggregator, to balance all the loads, to use all the loads to balance the grid real time, generator, since generation is localized in the same area, retailer, balance responsible party also, and which is specific to this role, that the services are not provided to third parties in terms of congestion management or frequency and ancillary services, but they are internalized. And this means that the cooperative here, as a microgrid manager, will play the role of the DSO and of the TSO. What for? Well, this offers the possibility to be largely autonomous from the main grid. It is, of course, very well suited for islands, but in the future, this can be more and more the role on our way toward decentralization of the energy system, and this would be very fun to see a new generation of cooperatives being microgrid manager. I hope you enjoyed this second video on demand response, and I'm open to any questions and requests related to this video. Thank you very much.